Welcome everyone. My name's Karen Corrigan and I'm one of the original presenters of an Insights lecture from 2011 which we're revisiting this evening. It launched a new online collection of local dialect materials for the public that reflected the history of this region and its people over time. Back then, our collection was restricted to varieties found just in Newcastle or in Gateshead. Since then, we've considerably expanded our horizons, and the new version of our resource now includes interviews from as far north as rural Northumbria to as far south as Middlesbrough. The number of recordings has gone up considerably too. In the lecture you're about to hear, we felt very proud of ourselves to have digitised over 100 interviews and transcribed 500,000 words. Looking back now, that's actually small fry. Our new version is actually what you might call a mega corpus because it contains over 850 interviews amounting to more than 6 million words of transcribed text. We've also expanded the age range. Now, as well as speakers born in the 1890s to 1990s, our newest sets of recordings are from local teenagers born in the 2000s. This means we can keep bang up to date, not only with how northeastern dialects are changing, but also with how lifestyles and values are likewise moving on with the times, which are indeed always a-changin', as Bob Dylan used to say back in the 1960s, when the recordings from the Talk of the Toon were first being collected. So sit back, relax, and enjoy listening to what Geordie sounded like back then.
Karen and I were talking a while ago about the sustainability issue, and the question she was asking me was whether I thought issues of linguistics and dialect and so on fit into the framework of sustainability that we're focusing on here, to which I answered, why aye. And we went on talking to reveal she was going to do this lecture, and one thing led to another, and I promised, now I'm now going to have to deliver on it, to do a little sung preface to tonight's lecture. So this is a couple of very short Pitmatic dialect songs that I learned where I live in Berkeley from people who used to work in the pits, and what we're going to hear tonight about some of the changes that have happened in the language. I think a canny few of the words in here people here will only be familiar with if they knew people that worked in the pits and talked to them about pit work. So definitely local words, but not a lot of them very common anymore. Rap at the bank, me canny lad, wind her away, keep turning. The backshift men are ganning yem, they'll be back here in the morning. Me father used to call the Toon, when the long shift it was hour, and ganning out by, you'd hear him cry, 'tis the nights after four. He cry, rap at the bank, me canny lad, wind her away, keep turning. The backshift men are ganning yem, they'll be back here in the morning. And when that awful day arrived, the last shift for me father, a fall of stones and broken bones, but still a beyond the clatter, he cried, rap at the back, me canny lad, wind her eat slow, that's clever, this poor old lad has taken bad, he'll be back here never. So jowl, jowl, and listen, lad, you'll hear that cool face walking. There's many a marra missing, lad, because he wouldn't listen, lad. Me father always used to say, pit walks more than hewing. You've gotta coax the coals along and not be riving and chewing. So jowl, jowl, and listen, lad, you'll hear that cool face walking. There's many a marra missing, lad, because he wouldn't listen, lad. Now the deputy crawls from flat to flat, and they put our arms to chummins, and the man at the face must nigh his place like a mother na's her young'uns. So jowl, jowl, and listen, lad, you'll hear that cool face walking. There's many a marra missing, lad, because he wouldn't listen, lad. So you can stick that in the electronic corpus. Anyway, it gives us great delight to introduce Karen. Having spent some time talking with her one-on-one, I know what a great enthusiast and how knowledgeable, how animated she is about academic discipline. And I'm also delighted that our colleagues Adam Mearns and Hermann Moisl are also going to be involved tonight in the presentation. So without any further ado, we'll hand over to Professor Karen Corrigan for the Talk of the Toon. That's how it should be pronounced.
I'm kind of sorry now I invited him. It's too hard an act to follow. I thought I'd start off by introducing the team to you. So here we are. I also thought I'd fess up about our lack of Geordie credentials by comparison to Paul here. So Isabel, who's here, was actually born in Germany. In fact, we've just had to say Auf Wiedersehen Pet to her because she's gone back to Germany to take up a job at the University of Leipzig. Hermann Moisl, name might give you a clue, he's also German, but he grew up in Canada. You've probably already figured out that I'm Irish, and he, over there, is the worst confession of all. He's a Mackem from Sunderland. We've been aided and abetted in this enterprise by these three guys, some of whom are here this evening. It's a company called NetSkills, and they've helped us to try and take the tack of the Toon and make it into a website that's user-friendly for a whole range of different people, from the Google generation, who we talk about in our title, but also the Silver Surfers, who are out there. I can see you. And we want to try and make it as accessible as possible to a very wide range of people. Our website reflects changes over time. So, for instance, we have images here from 1969, which reflects Northumberland Street as it was then. And we also have images because the material we've got also comes from the 1990s. This is Northumberland Street again, clearly looking rather different to what it did back in the 1960s. We also have new material from the 2000s. So again, Northumberland Street and the variety that we work on has changed in these kind of interesting ways. And the material we've got captures these changes. Social changes, cultural changes, and historical changes. This website, which you'll eventually be able to download for yourselves and have a look and have a play at, also captures attitudes and opinions. Not just about Geordies knowing about Londoners and what they think of Londoners, or Mackems, we'll hear about that in a second, but also how Geordies think other people perceive them. So I'm going to play you the first extract from the material, and you can listen to that.
Well, how would you compare it to London then?
Oh, the people are arrogant in London. They don't speak to you.
Oh, they're better in Newcastle.
They don't. They just ignore you. I mean, you go up and say hi, and hi. I mean, you go to a Geordie and say hi, so at least they'll answer you.
Yeah.
Well, some of them do.
They're a lot friendlier.
But if you were to say what you compare to the Mackems, or Sunderland, then you'll find a different story.
I don't think these are now Mackems in that kind
I'll
of
work with them.
That's why we cut it off just there. I wanted to say a little bit about the background to the material that we've got, where we've inherited it from and where it originates. So that's this next slide. We've actually got 3 different projects involved, and there are 3 different sources of material. There is the Newcastle Electronic Corpus of Tyneside English, which includes material from the 1960s as well as the 1990s. And then there's a newer corpus, what we call a monitor corpus, and we call it that because it's ongoing. Year on year, new material gets added to it. And that's NECTE 2. and that started to be collected in the 2000s. What we're doing in this new project is we're putting those together as the Diachronic electronic corpus of Tyneside English. The last one of these, this Diachronic electronic corpus, has actually generated 2 different websites. The one that we're going to talk about today, which is the TAC of the Toon website, which is public-facing, and the more academic website, which we're leaving with the very boring title of Diachronic Electronic Corpus of Tyneside English. So these are the 2 websites. TAC of the Toon is an archive of local language and stories, sharing the memories, thoughts, excuse me, and opinions of the people of Tyneside. The basis of the archive is the material that I already talked about. I'm going to start with the 1960s and 1990s material first of all. This is material collected in what was known as the Tyneside Linguistic Survey back in the 1960s. And it was collected by a group of staff and students in the School of English here. And in fact, one of them is in the audience. I'm not sure if he wants to be anonymous, but he is definitely here. And in fact, he's the guy who did all of the interviews, so you'll actually hear him back as he sounded then in the 1960s. And they were interviews with Tynesiders who were encouraged to talk about their life histories and attitudes towards the local dialect at a time when Tyneside looked like this, when, you know, a ship grew at the end of your street, basically. Rather different to the kinds of pedestrianised images of Northumberland Street that we've just looked at.
Oh, I think somebody fed up because to me that's kind of funny. Yeah. I mean, the only time a fed up's any good in the northeast is when everything's booming. Like beggars, the shipyards, everybody wants them. You know, like tradesmen are in demand, like.
So, you know, clearly recalling a time when shipyards were such an important feature of Newcastle. And we've tried to match that with still and moving images that reflect what Newcastle looked like at the time as well. We also have this more modern corpus, phonological variation and change in contemporary spoken English. Again, it was developed at Newcastle, but by a different team of people. And again, one of those team are actually here tonight. And they're recordings this time of conversations involving pairs of friends or relatives. And they reflect newer Tyneside in that, for instance, this is a very important place in Tyneside because that's where trains went to load coal, to go on ships, to go out to the rest of the world. But by the 1990s, it was actually an area that was really in need of redevelopment. And in fact, part of the redevelopment strategy was to hold a garden festival here, which is this image here, trying to really attract new business to Staithes. Let's have a listen to a conversation from that period.
It's the same as like say the miners. They're trying to cut employment, but they lay all their miners off, which was a huge joke. That laying all them people off and put them on the dole, and then saying we were all trying to cut the levels on the dole. Every pitch, I think every pit there is now was closed.
Now, Paul mentioned at the beginning that we're keen to preserve and sustain this material over time. And in the same way that the Staithes Monument is a listed monument, we also want to do that for the 1960s material and the 1990s material. In fact, when we got the Tyneside Linguistic Survey material from the 1960s, we didn't get our hands on it until the mid-1990s, by which time quite a lot of it was beyond repair. We did, however, manage to salvage quite a bit of it. So in fact, we have, at the moment, 55 complete interviews, almost 500,000 words, or 41 hours of audio altogether from both of those time periods. Let's look now at this new corpus, the NECTE corpus. Started, as I said, in the mid-2000s, really 2007 onwards. This is what Staithes looks like now, in this period. it is a redevelopment, it's a new housing estate. So again, quite different in terms of the images of stays that we've already seen. And this time it's again interviews and conversations involving pairs of informants. So it's kind of rather like the style of the phonological variation and change material collected in the 1990s.
Of course, on the old days you used to get the little boats going up to Dunstan Staithes and so on, and the little coal, you know, for coal and
always
whatnot.
the coal side doors in the ships there. That's how it was always so dirty. The men were all...
But that swing bridge is quite fascinating. I mean, when you think how old it is and how marvellously it works and so on, has done all these years.
So again, even though this was recorded in the 2000s, it still remembers back to the days of the halcyon days, really, of Newcastle as a shipbuilding industry and Newcastle as a coal mining area. This material was actually collected by undergraduate and postgraduates and vacation scholars attached to the school that I belong to the School of English. In fact, again, some of them were in the audience, and we clearly are very thankful for the work that they've put into that. It's not completely altruistic, because they then use the material themselves in independent studies, further essays they do, and in fact, postgraduates and undergraduates use it for dissertations. Just to give you a flavour of the kind of work that people have done with it, here are some poster presentations that are done as part of a module that I run on aspects of gender differences in narratives belonging to the material. Do men really interrupt more than women? Older Tyneside speakers use more sentence tags than younger speakers, yeah. So again, you know, you've got a group of students here who've gone to the material, collected data from males, females, young speakers, old speakers, and they've done some statistical analysis on it, noting, for instance, that the majority of tags, 41%, were actually produced by older male speakers. Second to this were the younger male speakers. So this yana feature clearly seems to be a male feature, and particularly an older male feature. So it wouldn't be appropriate at all for me to use it. I'm not saying anything about Paul. We wanted to say a little bit as well about how we, if you like, take those scripts that the students produce, what they look like, and how we turn them, if you like, from script to a screen version that's suitable for a website. So this is how they start off. You can see it's full of, I suppose, what you might call gobbledygook, but it's kind of useful for us to know that this interview took place in 08-09, that the person involved was from Newcastle, BB is the pseudonym, and 329 is just an identifier number, so we can tell precisely who this person was. We can also record things like laughter, which took place during the interview. A lot of the interviews are actually quite full of laughter. And it also records things like when people get interrupted. And this is, if you remember back to the poster presentation, where do men interrupt more than women? This kind of thing can be worked out looking at the material. But clearly that's got a lot of kind of, you know, linguists want to read that kind of information. But I bet you guys, if we send you to the website and force you to look at a whole load of random numbers like that, will think, well, what's that got to do with me? I don't want to see it like that. I want to see it in a very different format. So in fact, what we've been doing this year is changing these into a format that looks like that. And what Adam's going to do for you is to demonstrate how this works in real life.
I'm going to build up to that though, because that's the exciting bit. You don't give away the exciting bit at the beginning. First of all, I'm going to go through and look at a few features of language that we can spot and analyse by looking at the material. Before we even get to that though, we've got some quiz questions. Now you can keep track of your score for these questions if you want. That might be important. There's no prize apart from the self-satisfaction of knowing that you've got more than the person sitting next to you, which might be important, you know, if you're married or something. That would be important. So the first question, what are kets? Are they coal miners' boots, sweets, trousers or pants, small fishing boats, or lazy Sunday afternoons? Any answers? Does anyone want to venture an answer as to what kets are? Yes, sweets, they said in chorus, so no one was voting for anything else. They are sweets. Anyone think of a similar sounding word that is the answer to one of the other meanings there? Keks, your keks or kegs, some people say, for your trousers or pants, supposedly deriving from kicks, your keks. Okay, so you might have 1 point there. Well done. The second question, just to ease us in. What is a piggy? Not in the obvious sense. I hope you all know that. We wouldn't have a quiz question about that. That's dumbing down. But in a dialect sense, what is a piggy? Is it a pea shooter? A small fishing boat? You'll see this crops up again and again. I like the idea of something being a small fishing boat. We might get there eventually. You'll never know. Is it a hot water bottle, a coal miner's cart, or a deadly karate kick? Not on a lazy Sunday afternoon. So the answer for that one, a piggy, a coal miner's cart. Any votes for anything else? A hot water, thank you. It's a hot water bottle. And you might understand why when you see a picture of a piggy. It has a snout. So presumably it's some kind of metaphorical attachment of the words to that. Now, these kind of words, where a word that has a typical meaning in some other form adopts this kind of metaphorical meaning in dialect, that can lead to confusion if a Northumberland speaker or Northeast speaker goes to a different area. So back in 1894, Hislop reported in his important dictionary, a traveller reported that in Northumberland the people slept with the pigs for warmth. He'd been asked if he would have a piggy in his bed. Presumably he said no, otherwise he'd know that that wasn't what was being asked. He should have said yes, being adventurous, you never know what's going to happen. Okay, so you might have 2 points now, and that would be good. Our first feature, we'll look at how the corpus material reflects features of accent and dialect. Here's a bit of a transcript from a 41 to 50-year-old woman speaking in the 1960s. And there's lots of distinctive pronunciations that she has in this that you'll hear in a moment, but there's one particular set of words that run through this where you'll hear a very characteristic Northeast pronunciation. Characteristic in that it's reflected in the name of the website as well. I hope I'm not giving too much away. It's quite a big clue. If you don't get it, I mean, you're not very good with the whole clues thing. But listen to this.
And where'd you live after that?
Well, I got myself married, you see.
Yes. And
I was married when I was about 19. And I lived in with my mother for not quite 2 years, but for an eye. And I went to the lovely hill, that was my first house.
Yes, yes.
And I shifted, I got next street to be near my mother, you know, and the flat.
Remember I said 41 to 50. Students think she's about 90. Now partly that's because she does have a very conservative accent. Partly it's because she's obviously been smoking tabs since she was 6. But I love the way she says, I got myself married, you see. Such regret. In my mind's eye, I like to imagine she's looking over at her comatose husband, sitting in his chair with his big gut and his can of beer or something. Anyway, what's the sound that I'm interested in, do you think? The words that she pronounced in a very characteristic way. There was more than one of them. Hoose, exactly. We've got hooses, doon twice, a boot, and hoose. The very first one, the first example, she doesn't say oot quite, she says out. But then later on in this transcript we get...
they were modernised and taken the fireplace to put the central heat in there.
So it's definitely there. She says oot when she's talking about this terrible modern idea of putting central heating in. So we've got this sequence of words, and that's important. It's not just one word with a characteristic pronunciation, it's a whole set of them with the same kind of pattern of pronunciation, where people who don't have this accent, other speakers of other English accents would say house and down and about and out. And where that sound appears for them, for her, it's always oo. So she says hoose and a boot and doon and oot. Now, material from the Survey of English Dialects in the 1950s charts where that pronunciation falls in the country. So north of that red line, they found that people pronounced the word house like hoose. Not everyone, but many people who had traditional dialects and accents. Whereas south of that line, they said house. Okay? Now, look at these strange words. The top one is pronounced hoose, and the second one is dune, and then we have abutan, and at the bottom, ut. Does anybody know what they are?
Old English.
Thank you. Who said that? They are Old English, so Danish is a good answer as well. Any kind of Scandinavian answers too. But that's Old English. Hoos, duna, abutan, ut. The pronunciation that she has in her very traditional northeast accent is the same kind of pronunciation that you get in Old English. So in that sense, this dialect and accent are rather conservative. You know, when people write into the newspapers and complain about hearing dialects and accents, as they still do, unfortunately, it used to happen a lot more in the past, they were writing from a kind of conservative standpoint. They only wanted to hear southern sorts of accents, southern English kind of accents. They were very conservatively minded, and yet their pronunciation is the newer one. Yeah? Newer in my terms, I'm an Anglo-Saxonist. It's actually 1500 to 1700 AD when this change takes place, but that's terribly modern as far as I'm concerned. So this is a very conservative accent in that regard. Now, let's hear a bit of variation by listening to something from the 1990s. And we've got a set of words we can be on the hear out for, if that's not a phrase that means anything. Where we might expect possibly the same sound, we might expect a different sound. Let's see what we've got.
Were you born in Princess Mary as well?
Princess Mary,
Well, there you are, didn't even know that.
Yeah.
I was born there as well.
I was born in there. And, we lived down in the Great Pilot State. And then we just moved around from there. I forget how many houses we actually lived in.
His mother was a bit of a wanderer. He'd come home from school and somebody would say, oh, your mother shifted.
So a married couple this time, between the ages of 61 to 70, apparently a married couple who don't know each other very well. They've never thought to have this conversation before, but now they find out where they were each born. The husband doesn't say doon, though. He says something more like down. Yeah? It's not down, it's not the kind of sound you would hear newsreaders say on the BBC, but it's not that doon. So perhaps something's changed over that period of time between the 60s and the 90s. Perhaps there's some other kind of variation involved in why we sometimes get this pronunciation with some people, and then other people have that doon, oot kind of pronunciation. There was a pronunciation in there that was, again, very characteristic of the Northeast, and that we also heard the 1960s woman saying. I didn't even know that, she said. We go back to the 60s woman.
And I shifted up on next street to be near my mother, you know, and the flat.
She shifted as well, by the way, moving house, shifting for both of them. So, you know, in the flats, and then the 1990s woman.
There you are, I didn't even know that.
I didn't even know that. Earlier in that interview with this married couple, she says, oh, sorry, that was Old English as well, Knawa, and just like the other ones were Old English. But she says,
Well, both brought up in the same area, actually, but we didn't know each other.
no, not now. Now, that's the beginning of the interview. And the later bit is when they're not quite arguing. They're having that married couple kind of not arguing, passive-aggressive thing, almost, when they're deciding that they don't know where each other's born. So is that her more relaxed voice when she says, I didn't even know that? Whereas when she says, we didn't know each other, that's approaching her telephone voice. Because she's being interviewed. And she's still thinking about being interviewed. Now, we don't just hear that in the 60s and the 90s. Here's an example from 2007.
I always win because they say, because I'm always dead sarcastic, right? So whenever they always say, don't be sarcastic, you know, don't bring up to be sarcastic.
Don't be sarcastic, you know. I don't bring you up to be sarcastic. Sure, that's a sentiment that all parents have about their children. We also have people commenting on this kind of feature because people are aware of these things and sometimes talk about them rather than simply using them. So this is a again from 2007, and one of the informants is saying that she sometimes tells the other one off for the kinds of things that she says.
Because she says things like really common. Like, I don't know.
So they think, or at least at that point in the interview, they think that I didn't know is really common. It goes on a bit further and they decide that I didn't know actually isn't that common. There's other things that are far worse that she says that are much more common. So we get that reflected in all three of the periods that we have available to us in our archive. Now, a third question. I hope you've kept your score. When is this quote from? From our three periods, the 60s or the 90s or the 2000s, talking about discipline in schools. I think they've gone a bit too far, because I don't think there's the, I don't think myself there's the discipline now. In fact, from what I see, they can sort of please themselves what they do.
All three.
All three. Quite right. In fact, this one's from the 60s, but that is the point, that you hear that same attitude about, oh, things are getting worse. These days, it's not like when I was a kid, in all three periods. So you see how having that available to us, of being able to listen to material from all of the different periods, shows us how attitudes are often the same, as well as different over time. So just to give a bit of context to what this chap thinks, what leads up to him saying this is him explaining the kind of discipline that he encountered before the 60s, you know, in the 40s or the 30s, whenever he was at school.
There was nothing for me to go out in front of the teacher. He used to have a about 2 foot of a billiard cue, the end of a billiard cue. You put it over your fingers there, and I've seen my fingers black and blue. Now look at the song and dance they made about this kid who wrote that essay. So it was on television, it was in the newspaper. Oh good God, those days, blame me, the teacher could murder you practically, nobody dare say a word to them.
There you go. Any teachers in the audience? Anyone fancy 2 foot of a billiard cue? It's tempting, isn't it? But health and safety. Nanny state, isn't it? It's terrible. But that kind of attitude repeated in 2008, a 46-year-old woman, so talking about the mid to late 70s, the same period that older man is saying, well, it's terrible, they can do what they like now. She says this.
I remember clearly junior school, and even then there was discipline, and we had a math teacher for our last year. We used to get the sand shoe. It was like a sand shoe cupboard at the back, and there was a large sand shoe in there. So it had a Dutch girl come to stay, and she was very big compared to the rest of us. So she had this large sand shoe, and she was only with us a few months, but this sand shoe stayed in the cupboard, and that was what we used to be disciplined with. And I look now at junior school children, and I can't believe that you would go up to the sand shoe cupboard and get your sand shoe and take it down to the front and bend over and be whacked with it on the bottom.
So that, ladies and gentlemen, is how times have changed. Either 2 foot of a billiard cue in the 1960s, or a massive Dutch girl's massive sand shoe in the 1970s. Which is worse? I don't know. And it's a sand shoe cupboard, that's all they kept in there. That sand shoe was so big that it needed to go in the cupboard by itself. She must have been a big Dutch girl. Okay, so that's discipline in schools. Now something else. People talk about politics, people talk about politicians. So what I did, I took a list. Well, first of all, I checked to see how much people talk about politics and things, and there was quite a lot of it. Lots of context where people are talking about politics. Then I wondered to myself, as I often do, which politicians do people talk about? So I got a list of all of the prime ministers and all of the leaders of the opposition from the war to now. I won't tell you which ones I had to look up. I forgot about Nick Clegg initially. And I ran it through the different subcorpora, the different parts of our archive to see how often people mention politicians. In the 60s and the 90s, there's not much mention of named politicians, and yet people are talking about politics a lot. Think about that idea of the cult of the personality. And yet people are talking about politics, but not politicians. So there's a mention of Churchill. There are 3 mentions of Harold Wilson. One where he's Mr. Wilson. And it's Mr. Wilson didn't do very much. So it's not a positive reference. It's saying that he was rather inactive, and yet he's still Mr. Wilson. In the 90s, a couple of mentions of some bloke called John Major, and one mention of Margaret Thatcher. Then a subset of the stuff that I looked at in the 2000s, we get that polling result. I'll become Peter Snow in a moment. I'll have the House of Commons filled with little figures. Now that doesn't say a lot. That kind of reinforces the idea that people are talking about politics more than they're talking about politicians. But that one is interesting. In the 2000s, still, Mrs. Thatcher dominates in terms of people having references to named politicians. Now I've just called her Mrs. Thatcher because I'm nice and polite and I'm even wearing a tie. But she doesn't get called Mrs. Thatcher. We had Mr. Wilson, but she's either Thatcher or Margaret Thatcher or Maggie Thatcher. And the references to her are, can I put this euphemistically, none too polite. So about the miners' strike, we get a couple of things. That was when Margaret Thatcher's jackboot came down. And they call her Maggie Thatcher that did that. She was no good for the North East. So this still exercises people's minds, and they still want to talk about this when they're being interviewed in the 2000s, when they're reminiscing about what happened in the 80s and the 90s. Now, that's politicians, political parties. What kind of references do we get to political parties? This isn't a simple kind of polling thing, because this can be references where people are being rather rude about the political parties, but it does show you which ones people are talking about more than others. Is a very general kind of idea. In the 60s, it looks like a polling result from a general election in the North East, you know, where you weigh the Labour vote rather than counting it. In 2011, we've had a swing to the Liberal Democrats, as you might expect. Yeah, bearing in mind what we know happened in 2010. What also happens then is not just that the number of references to this kind of thing, references to Liberal Democrats, increases, but the way that people talk about things changes when these historical events happen. Okay, so let's briefly look at that. In the 1960s, references to the Liberals, well, everyone's entitled to change their mind about politics. I think most of us are floating voters. I know my brother's flirting with the idea of being a Liberal. Only flirting with it, you know, you don't want to take things too far. Someone else says, well, I would vote Liberal, but we don't have any Liberal candidates. In 2008, we could just have the Lib Dems in. Laughter. The Lib Dems, they don't stand for anything. Taxing the rich, that's what they stand for. They just sit on the fence all of the time. And it's that stereotype about the Lib Dems being irrelevant because they're the third party and they're only small and it doesn't matter. But then things change when people talk about them in 2011. Well, to be honest, right, if I could have voted, because she's only 17, I would have voted for Liberal Democrats, and I would have cried when he, but not naming him, Lord Voldemort here, chose to join up with the Tories, because that's my vote. That could have gone somewhere else. So the things that happen around the people who are interviewed in our archive are naturally reflected in the archive and can be found in the archive, for example, with the reference to politics and politicians. Question 4. If you've got your score sheet still, what does clarty mean? Small fishing boat. I haven't forgotten about it. I'm very persistent. Sticky, knotty or tangled, mucky or muddy, and or deck. Any votes for clarty then? Mucky and muddy, like that child is mucky and muddy and has fantastic shorts on. I like the colour, I'm not too sure about the cut of those shorts. Does anybody know any similar sounding kind of words for sticky? Flaggy, well done. Knotty? Cotty. There's tatty as well, of course, but cotty. Okay, that was question 4. On question 5, a cushion, mouth. The empty sector of a pit, junction 62 on the A1. Mouth. There's a fantastic, just in case you don't know what a mouth looks like. There's a picture of a mouth. It does also, or could also mean something else. That sound, that word form, could be an empty sector of a pit, but it's an unrelated word, because that pit word, that go for gob, comes from Norse, the language of the Vikings, whereas gob, meaning a mouth, comes from a different wave of migration into the northeast. This is where I got my own back for all that Macam stuff. That's an Irish word, we think, and reflects the migration of Irish people and Scottish people into the northeast during the Industrial Revolution. And just like the Anglo-Saxons naturally leave their mark on the dialect that we have, and the Vikings naturally leave their mark on the dialect that we have because they settled here too, then other waves of migration and settlement naturally leave their mark in some way on the dialect and the accent that we have. So gob is one example of that. Use is another possible example of that, as in Y-O-U-S. It's a very useful plural for that pronoun. You also find that in Liverpool and in Manchester and in other areas where there's settlement of Irish migrants. Okay, that's question 5. Now, that shows us that we're reflecting a variety of voices in this archive that we have. Here's someone from the 1960s who you might think just sounds like the other northeast speakers that we've heard from that period.
I start work before 4 o'clock now, so I know that's mainly for the contract work we've got for the lasses from the States and different factories and offices and things like that.
Yeah? In fact, he's born and brought up in Ulster, but then moved here, and just like migrants can move to a place and they can influence the accent and dialect there, then individual migrants can be influenced by the accent and dialect there. So he's picked up a kind of northeast accent, as his wife notes.
It's hard listening to you actually, because every now and then you sound like a perfect Tyneside, and you know, just a little bit later you sound like a perfect Ulster.
You hear him over the car radio, you really sound Geordie, you know. He used to come in when we first come over here, he used to come in and try his best with the Geordie language. And he used to say to me, I'm gone going out. I'm gone going out, you know, the 2 words.
So it took him a while to acclimatise, but you know, he got there in the end. And one final example before we move on, I'll show you the Talk of the Toon website. A different kind of migration, a different kind of community. This is a short film clip from Tina Gavari's film, Tina Gavari also in the School of English, about the Arab community in South Shields, which has a very long history going back to the 1890s, and this is a film that was made with people reflecting on Muhammad Ali's visit there sometime in the 70s, I think it was.
Well, at the time there was lots of Arabs, Somalis, it was buzzing, it was vibrant in the town. You know, you couldn't move by coffee shops all the way up and down Lagos. It's just the community is dwindling here now. It's not as many as there used to be.
There's no more younglings come to work on the ships.
Just a few left from when the Phillies came over. All gone. Just everyone's gone.
We the people, all the people, community, and the people from the people to the people, for the people. When did he go? It was 1936.
Well, your father did?
Aye, well, I come on the merchant ships and that. He was saying, well, he gave me and that. He said, my dad gave flights to Germans,
exactly,
and that, just like everyone else. All the dogs.
But the things that were allowed to be printed in the Gazette, people were writing in the Gazette, you know, we should send them back. We should send them back and their children who were born here. People writing in the Gazette saying we should send them back and their kids. No child of mixed race will ever be as good as any white child. And all that stuff. This was printed in the Gazette, you know.
You know? ends with the same kind of tag that we heard in the 60s. So all of these voices, these new voices and old voices, are the kind of things that are reflected in our archive, which we shall now, cross your fingers, have a look at. Oh, not that, I've just seen that. There you go. So that's the Talk of the Toon website with its various sections. There'll be material from the events that we've done over the past year for schools, in the schools section. There'll be the kind of quizzes that I've shown you. I might find one where the answer actually is a small fishing boat. I might not. I'm capricious like that. And that'll go in the quizzes section. And then in the themes section, that's where we have the main kind of route into the interviews and the different kind of content that you find. So the material of the different interviews has been sorted and indexed essentially according to these themes. Where we've got themes at the top there that relate to people and families and things like that, and then we've got a second batch of themes that are about work and education and sort of infrastructure, if you like, and then themes at the bottom that are to do with entertainment and culture and that sort of thing. So since we're in an education establishment, that's what you get. Excuse me. When you get click on when you choose a theme, you get photo results, you get video results to look at. For the moment, what's been uploaded so far is the photos that we've got from Beamish Museum and the videos that we've got from the Northern Region Film and Television Archive at Tyneside University, Tyneside material. But that will be augmented in the coming weeks with other material from more recent periods. And then you get the text results, or text and audio results for the interviews where people are talking about these kind of things. And you can filter these results as you see fit. So you might want to only look at what's available in the 90s for this result. So you would then filter it, and you see how that number's dropped down, so we've only got the 90s material. You might be, since this is education, you might be interested in what 16 to 20-year-olds in the 90s are saying about education. So again, you would filter it down like that. Okay? Now we'll get to the interviews in a moment, but first of all the photos. We've got a picture of Old Westow Secondary School, 1913, because some people in the 1960s material, you know, they are harking back to when they were at school, and their memories go back further than the 1960s, of course. So our photo material goes back further than the 1960s. Or you can expand them and see what the whole set is. As I said, that'll be augmented in the coming weeks with more recent stuff. There's my favourite one at the moment. So I don't know if you know this, but in the early to mid part of the 20th century, local newspapers in the northeast used to run a Spot the Nun competition. Some weeks it was easier than others. I mean, 2 of the 3 nuns in this picture are hardly trying to hide at all. I'm lying, there are 4 nuns there. But there are the pictures. The videos. We'll have a quick look at the videos if we've got time. What video shall we have? Let's have a nightlife one. It's a good one. Here, where am I? This one. About rising beer prices.
Three of the Northeast's largest breweries say that the increase in the price of beer has been forced on them by rising costs. One of them has pointed out that apart from tax variations, the price of beer has been increased only once during the last 10 years. Another has gone as far as to apologise to its unemployed customers in West Hartlepool. Now let's see how some beer drinkers are reacting to this news. What do you think about this increase in the price of beer?
I think it's a liberty.
How long have you been drinking?
Oh, for about 25 years.
Has it gone up much in that time?
To my knowledge, just went up about 6 or 7 times.
Do you think this last rise is justified?
I don't think it's justified at all. I don't think it's justified at all. Let's face it, they're complaining about not getting customers into the pubs, and now they're sticking a penny extra on the beer. So they get less custom, won't they?
What do you think about this penny increase on the price of beer?
Well, I think it's a bit too pretty much. You know, it's increase. I mean, you take out the working man's pocket, don't you? I mean, blokes come in for a pint and they like a pint, but I mean, they're going to cut it down now, aren't they?
The price of a lot of things have risen during recent years. Don't you think the price of beer should go up too?
No, I don't. Why should it go up? I mean, it's a working man's all he's got to come in for. I mean, instead of a pint, I mean, it's just taking out the working man's pocket, that's all.
Will you still drink as much?
Oh, I'll still drink as much. I mean, I still think it's a liberty, right? Put it up.
As landlord of this public house, what kind of a reaction have you had from your public today?
Murder. Absolute murder.
What sort of things have they been saying?
Well, they're thinking there's a fiddle for putting the beer up.
Do you think it's justified?
Well, I suppose if the governor says it is, yes, it must be.
Will you in fact be passing on these complaints?
Well, I suppose if I'm asked, I'll have to. Eventually, so, well, usually the outside manager would ask you, just as a matter of form.
Excuse me, what do you think about this latest increase in the price of beer?
I think it's a diabolical liberty.
There you go. He doesn't need any more though, so that's the video results. Now a quick look at the, you can list all of the interviews that we've so far got on there, and in coming weeks the 2000s interviews will be added to this, and you can pick one that you like to look at. So let's have, and there's that interface that Karen showed you an image of earlier, where we have the speaker information on the right hand side. We've got the audio player there, and then we've got the transcription of the interview running down the left there, and then we've got the themes again running down the right. So if you just wanted to listen to it, you could do that. You could start it away and listen to it. He said, hopefully. No, try it a different way. If you're interested in a particular theme, you can click on the theme, and the words for that theme will be highlighted. It's not. Help. Do you know why it's not playing? Try refreshing the page. It does play, I promise. Let's go a different way and see if it will. I don't like Internet Explorer, but we can do that if we have to.
Well, then, forget to start at the beginning. Could you tell us first whereabouts you were born from?
Play it from the beginning and
Whereabouts?
read it through like that. Or as I said, if you're interested in a particular theme in that interview, you click on the theme and the words are highlighted. You see there's another one about the job there. So if we go back to there, you
it makes it, you know, open.
And it'll jump to that bit, and you can listen to the bit where that theme is discussed.
Oh, well, you see, well, the reason why is because I've got free travel. You see, I worked on the railway partly all my life, you see, and I have free passes and I have a privileged card. Well, I mean, it works this way. Now, it's 4 guineas to go to Manchester. Now, I used my passes up and I thought, oh, I'll just go on a privilege.
So you could pick any theme, you could pick any of the interviews that eventually get posted up on there, and hopefully find something interesting in the talk of the Toon. Thank you.
Last slide.
The acknowledgement. Nope, where that?
We just wanted to say a couple of thanks. We want to say thank you to you for allowing us to come. Thanks to Paul for a great start. I'd like to dedicate tonight's public lecture to all of the people who have given their voices, all of those students and staff at Newcastle University over the years who have dedicated their time to collecting this material. And I wanted to end with a little article that I've come across quite recently from someone called Peter Ewer, who used to be the head of the school that Adam, myself and Hermann belong to. It was published in 1964. It kind of gives you a sense of what he hoped for the School of English from 1964 to the present day. So I'll just read you his kind of views. He says, for instance, that he would like a Fellow of Tyneside Speech to be appointed. He also says that the Northeast is a city that is really important and needs to be documented. And I guess one of the things we hope to have achieved from the work that we've done is exactly that. So we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed.